Hi, I'm Emily and I am here with Maya Murphy's attorney, Eva Marie Franco Fox. Attorney Fox practices at Maya Murphy's office in Westport, Connecticut, and is admitted to practice law in both Connecticut and New York. My question today for Attorney Fox is, what can a Connecticut prenuptial agreement say about the expenses and liabilities of the parties?
Connecticut prenuptial and postnuptial agreements can both address the expenses and liabilities of the parties. Specifically, it can state how the expenses and liabilities of the parties will be treated during the course of the marriage and in the event of a death of one of the parties or in the event of dissolution of the parties. So it's important to include these provisions in your agreement in order to really fully address any issues that may arise in the future. So how can you address expenses or debts of the parties? As far as expenses, it's important for the parties to address how they will be classified and how they will be managed financially moving forward during the course of the agreement in order to fully understand how they will be treated after the marriage. So, for example, the parties should address or define what's considered an individual expense or the expense of the parties or joint family expense. So, for example, a party may have a gym membership and that may be considered an individual expense, but utilities, for example, may be considered a joint expense. The parties should define these different kinds of expenses and address how they will be handled financially. Now, it's important for the parties to know that in Connecticut, there is certain law that would prohibit the parties from contracting around certain types of family necessary expenses. So, for example, expenses related to hospital charges, medical treatment, doctor's bills, dwelling expenses, these types of expenses, the courts generally prohibit the parties from putting the obligation on only one of the spouses because the thought is that both spouses should be contributing to these family needs. It's only these certain limited expenses that are specifically addressed within this, a Connecticut statute. So it's important for the parties to become familiar with those different expenses so that they're in compliance with the law when drafting and negotiating the agreement. Outside of these specific expenses that are listed within the statute, the parties really are free to contract around how to address the different kinds of either personal or joint expenses of the parties. As far as liabilities, similarly, the parties should address any kind of treatment of premarital debts or joint debts, including how are they going to define what a joint debt is? Is it going to be something that the parties both mutually have to consent to? Is it going to be something that goes towards their joint benefit? Does it matter if it's going towards their joint benefit if one of the parties doesn't consent to it or didn't put their name to that joint debt? These are all different kinds of issues that could arise during the marriage, and so it's important that the agreement contemplate these different situations and proactively address them so that the parties are never in a situation where they're getting divorced or one spouse has passed away and they don't know what their rights and obligations are as to these different debts. It's also important for the parties to really fully disclose their financial expenses and their financial debts prior to executing the agreement or in accordance with the state obligation to provide fair and reasonable disclosure. Parties may not realize that their significant other has extensive debt, and if they don't, they may be agreeing to a provision where perhaps premarital debts are then assumed by both spouses, and they may become financially responsible for that debt. So it's really important to draft these agreements in accordance with full and complete and fair financial disclosure so that both parties really understand what it is that they're obligating themselves to during the drafting and negotiation process. If you have any questions about either the disclosure of these expenses or debts or the drafting process and negotiating these different terms, feel free to contact our office. It's really critical to have a full understanding of what you're obligating yourself into when you sign these agreements. This way you can prevent any kind of uncertainty or litigation in the future.
Attorney Fox is available 24/7 and can be reached by calling 203-221-3100. You can also email Attorney Fox at efox@mayalaw.com, and please visit mayalaw.com for more information.